The financial conversation about divorce almost always happens too late. It happens after the settlement is signed, after the division of assets is finalized, after the decisions that most shape the long-term financial outcome have already been made under conditions of maximum stress and minimum clarity. And it happens with a particular framing that I find consistently unhelpful, the framing of damage control, of how to manage what is left, of how to make the best of a bad situation. That framing is understandable. It reflects a genuine and compassionate impulse to meet people where they are. But it misses something important about what the moment after divorce actually represents. It is not a conclusion. It is a beginning. Not the beginning someone would have chosen, but a beginning nonetheless, with real resources, real time, and a set of specific actions that produce dramatically different outcomes, depending on whether they are taken deliberately or allowed to happen by default. My name is William Grant. Over the course of the next several minutes, I want to walk through what I consider to be the 5 most consequential financial actions available to someone rebuilding after divorce after 40. Not in the abstract, not as a checklist, but as a connected sequence of decisions that, taken together and in the right order, constitute the architecture of a genuinely new financial life. Each of these actions matters individually. Their sequence matters even more. The first, and the one that makes every subsequent action more likely to succeed, is building a complete and precise financial picture of your current position before making any other financial decision. I call this the honest inventory, and it is more difficult than it sounds, not because the information is hard to gather, but because looking at the complete picture requires setting aside several powerful emotional impulses simultaneously. The impulse to focus on what was lost, the impulse to compare the current position to the position that existed before the marriage dissolved, the impulse to avoid the discomfort of seeing the actual numbers clearly rather than approximately. The honest inventory means listing every asset, every account, every owned property, every retirement balance, every insurance product, and every obligation, every debt, every recurring financial commitment, every legal obligation from the settlement, alongside every income source and every expense, not estimated but documented from actual account activity. When this inventory exists in complete form, it typically reveals 2 things simultaneously that most people cannot hold in their minds at once when they are working from approximate numbers and emotional impressions. The constraints that are real and non-negotiable, and the resources that are real and underappreciated. Both are almost always larger than they felt before the numbers were written down. The constraints because the abstract anxiety about the financial situation is often less specific than the actual numbers. The resources because assets that felt like part of a shared structure feel different when they are clearly named as yours, individually, with no competing claim. The second action builds directly on the first, using the honest inventory to establish a clear and single-income financial infrastructure from the ground up. This means calibrating every financial arrangement, housing costs, insurance, banking structures, monthly expense baseline, to what your income alone produces, rather than to what a 2-income household required, or to an aspirational standard that the income cannot yet support. This recalibration is genuinely uncomfortable in ways that have nothing to do with mathematics. After years or decades of a shared financial life, the lifestyle that felt normal was built for 2 incomes and 2 lives. Building the new infrastructure to what one income produces often means a meaningful step down in certain categories: housing size, car quality, discretionary spending level. that is experienced not as a responsible adjustment, but as a diminishment. The willingness to make this recalibration explicitly and completely, rather than maintaining the previous lifestyle on partial income through debt accumulation or by treating the settlement assets as operational funding rather than investment capital, is one of the clearest predictors of long-term financial reconstruction success that I observe. The people who rebuild effectively set the new infrastructure to the actual income quickly. The people who struggle delay this recalibration and find themselves with depleted settlement assets and an income that was never adequate to support the lifestyle they maintained. A woman named Millicent came to see me at 47, a graphic designer with a well-established client base and a reliable income, rebuilding after an 11-year marriage. The first thing we established together was that her monthly income, while solid, was approximately 60% of what the household had operated on. She had been living in an apartment priced to the full household income for 8 months. The settlement assets she had received were being consumed to cover the gap. In 6 months, at her adjustment rate, those assets would be substantially depleted, with nothing to show in terms of investment position. The recalibration, finding housing priced to her actual income, restructuring the monthly budget to what the income produced, was difficult and felt like regression. What it actually was the foundation of everything that followed. Within 4 months of the adjustment, she was running monthly surpluses that funded both an emergency reserve and an investment contribution for the first time since the divorce had begun. The third action is establishing a protection infrastructure sized for a single-income household with dependents, if applicable. This is not a glamorous financial conversation, and it is almost always deferred in favor of more exciting planning questions. But it is the action whose omission creates the most catastrophic outcomes when the circumstances that require it occur. In a two-income marriage, the financial system has inherent redundancy. If one income is disrupted by illness, accident, or job loss, the other income provides a partial cushion. In a single-income household, there is no redundancy. The disruption of the sole income through disability, serious illness, or death is a complete financial crisis for the household unless specifically protected against. Disability insurance sized to the actual income, life insurance scaled to the actual dependency obligation, and healthcare coverage secured independently. These are not optional for a single-income household with any financial obligations that extend beyond the next paycheck. Millicent had none of these in adequate form when we first spoke. Restructuring them took 2 months and cost a monthly premium that she initially questioned. What it created was the foundational security that made every other planning conversation realistic rather than theoretical. The fourth action is the systematic reconstruction of the retirement position. This is where most post-divorce financial conversations focus and where the time sensitivity is most acutely felt. A divorce at 43 or 47 or 50 creates a retirement position that is behind what it would have been, not as a matter of failure, but as a mathematical consequence of years in which the financial strategy was oriented around shared accumulation vehicles, often including real estate as a primary wealth-building mechanism, rather than around individually owned retirement accounts. The gap between the current retirement position and what would be needed is real, and it requires a specific response. Maximizing contributions consistently, structuring the investment within the account to produce both growth and emerging income over the available time horizon, and resisting the entirely understandable impulse to reduce contributions in years when the expense structure feels tight. Millicent's retirement account had a balance that represented roughly half of what her career length should have produced. Over the 7 years since we began working together, through consistent maximum contributions and a deliberate investment strategy, the balance has grown to a position that supports a realistic retirement trajectory, not the position she would have had from a different life, the position she built from the one she has. The fifth action is the one that takes longest to complete and that is least visible in any single year, but that ultimately represents the deepest form of financial reconstruction available. The development of a financial life that is genuinely and completely your own, organized around your actual values, your actual priorities, your actual relationship with financial risk, rather than a modified version of a shared financial life that no longer exists. This means making explicit decisions about what you want your financial life to look like and why, rather than inheriting the defaults of the marriage. It means examining every financial arrangement, every product, every institutional relationship, every spending pattern, and asking whether it serves who you are now or whether it persists from who you were when you were someone's spouse. Millicent described this process at our most recent meeting as the one that surprised her most. She had expected the practical financial reconstruction to be difficult and the values reconstruction to be natural. What she found was the opposite. The practical steps were hard but navigable. The process of building a financial life that genuinely expressed her own priorities, rather than a compromise between two people's priorities, was slower and more disorienting and more rewarding than anything else that happened in the 5 years after the divorce. The invitation I want to leave you with is not a specific task, but a specific question. Of the 5 actions I described today, honest inventory, infrastructure recalibration, protection, retirement reconstruction, and genuine values alignment, which one are you currently living in the default of rather than the decision of? Not which one you have not completed, which one you have not yet consciously chosen. The answer to that question is the beginning of the next chapter.